Well, welcome everybody. We'll get our meeting started. Today we have pilgrims from all over the world, perhaps with the exception of Australia. They're sleeping at the moment, so I've given them an undertaking that we will record this session and I'll post it on Facebook tomorrow. Although I've personally walked the Via de la Plata from Seville to Santiago a few times, I'm delighted that the real expert, a resident of Seville, Gerald Kelly, the guide writer, is here to speak to us and to answer our questions. You can ask questions in the chat function or send me a message and I'll invite you to unmute and you can simply ask your question. The more discussion we have, the more questions we have, the better. For me, the Via de la Plata is an epic route. And just to be clear, in this session, we will speak about the route from Seville to Astorga, where people can join the Camino Frances, if that's their choice, and also from Seville to Santiago, and the route goes via Orense, but we'll talk about that. By coincidence, when I was organizing this session, I heard a friend of mine intended to walk from Seville to Santiago next January. So I made a short video to give her a flavor of the route, and I think it will serve as a good introduction to our session. Now, I'm not the most technically literate, so just be patient with me while I do this.
Dear Kelly, I hear that you plan to walk the Via de la Plata from Seville to Santiago. This is a great choice. I love the route and it was my very first Camino. So I thought I'd make this little video as an introduction to the Via de la Plata. I had been holidaying in Seville for some years. Before I'd even heard of the Camino, I was very familiar with the great cathedral and the parks and the bars and the restaurants, of course. Try and spend some time there if you can. It's a wonderful city with a Plata España which feels as if you could be in Venice. Nearby you can visit Jerez, where the sherry comes from, and of course in Seville you must take in a flamenco show. One day a friend told me about the Camino to Santiago, and then I read that there was an old route which very few people walked from Seville. On my next visit to the city, I soon started to see yellow arrows. The yellow arrows as they leave the city. I tried out a day walk and lo and behold, the arrows guided me. At that time, Gerald hadn't produced his highly recommended guidebook. On the 2nd of January 2007, I set out with my rucksack to walk to Santiago. At the door of the cathedral, I looked down and there was a waymark on the ground. I looked across the road and there was an arrow on the wall opposite. I followed it and then there was another arrow. I basically followed these arrows for 36 days until I reached Santiago. After leaving the cathedral, you will soon pass the Roman ruins at Italica. These herald some of the finest ruins you will see on your way north. After that, you will look back on the steep ascent just before you cross the mountain to Castelblanco de los Arroyos, and you'll wonder at the distance you've travelled. Then look forward to see the town you will descend to. This is an experience with which you will become very familiar in the days to come. On to Monasterio, then Zafra, where you can have coffee in the Parador, a converted castle in the centre of town. You will see the Roman town of Merida from a very long way off. To enter the city, you have to cross the Roman bridge. Here, my very first Camino miracle occurred. I was dog-tired. As I crossed the Roman bridge, people going home from work came towards me. A voice rang out in Spanish, "Hola peregrino," hello pilgrim. This was Anna, a retired doctor who had walked the Camino Frances. She could speak no English and I could speak little Spanish. I explained I needed to find a bed. "Do you have a little money?" she asked, rubbing her fingers together. I said yes. "Come," she beckoned. Next thing, she marked me into the Parador, a 4-star hotel. "May I see the manager?" she asked the girl at the desk. When he appeared, they had an exchange in rapid Spanish. I can only assume she said something like, "This is a courageous pilgrim from Scotland who has walked all the way from Seville. Give him food and shelter, please." The manager nodded and wrote down the price on a piece of paper. The sum was less than I had paid in a run-down hostel the previous night. Before I could say done deal, he added, "And of course, sir, we will include breakfast." Now, I can't guarantee that Anna will be there when you arrive, but I'm sure you will enjoy Merida. As you leave, you will pass Roman ruins which mark the way to Cáceres, a beautiful hilltop medieval town. The scenery is fabulous, like walking on top of the world. Man-made lakes, sunken villages, walk under the huge, lonely Roman arch at Capara, and keep on until you're ascending to Baños de Montemayor. If someone told you you were in Switzerland, you might believe them. Then on to the university town of Salamanca and see the most beautiful Plata in all of Spain. On to Zamora, forward you will go. Gorgeous scenery, lakes, ruins, wild flowers, the silence. Then to Orense, only a few days from Santiago. I took a rest day and the women in the hostel told me to walk a route they call the Camino Cholesterol. As I followed her directions, I soon ended up at the thermal pools by the banks of the river. After walking 900 kilometres, I just lay in the hot water. Then, only 3 days to Santiago, punctuated by a visit to the monastery at Oseira, where Graham Greene spent many happy days. And finally to my destination, Santiago. I was elated to have made it, but reluctant to leave the journey behind. As I walked into the Plata Obradoiro and then went to my very first pilgrim mass in the cathedral, I had no idea how much that first Camino was to change my life. Buen Camino, Kelly.
So there we are, a brief introduction to the Via de la Plata. Now, I'll ask Gerald to tell us about his guide writing and about his experience of the Via de la Plata, and then we'll be open for questions.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. I hope you can all see me. I can't see myself for some reason, but never mind.
We can see you.
Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you everybody for coming along today. So I write a guidebook and an app to the Via de la Plata, by which I mean the route from Seville, which goes north as far as a place called Granja de Marihuela, and then it goes left and it turns into a Camino called the Camino San Andres. And that Camino goes all the way through Orense up to Santiago. When I refer to the Via de la Plata, I'm referring to the combination of these two Caminos, although strictly speaking, it's not correct, but anyway, it's just shorthand. Now, it's a long Camino. It's approximately a tiny bit more than 1,000 kilometers from Seville up to Santiago. In the southern section, especially, there are some long stages. There's a few stages with like 30 kilometers with no services of any sort. No cafes, no shops, no nothing. So it requires a certain amount of organization, which more than you would find on some of the, for example, the Camino Frances. Landscape is in the south. Well, the climate in the south of Spain is quite hot, so we see lots of palm trees and cacti. Can be quite dry, and in summer it can be extremely hot. It easily can be over 40 degrees centigrade. So this isn't really a summer Camino. This is a Camino which is great to walk in the spring, or even in the winter. You can be lucky with the weather. For instance, I walked this February, I walked from Seville up to Zamora, which is a little more than halfway. And we had fantastic weather nearly the whole time. We had 1 day of rain and 2 days up in, when we were already up near Salamanca, we had 2 days of snow, but it wasn't heavy snow. We ended up with, say, a light coating of snow on the ground, but it wasn't enough to cause us a problem. But it was cold at night. It was down to -5 at night. So that was a bit of a challenge. But besides that, if you don't mind the cold, it was great. So I walked the Camino a few times, and as I said, I've walked the guidebook. The first time I walked, I wrote a guidebook. The first time I walked was over 10 years ago now. And it hasn't changed a great deal in 10 years. It's a funny thing about the Via de la Plata that while other Caminos seem to get more and more pilgrims, I mean, you look at like the Camino Portuguese, which has just gone, I don't know, it's increased exponentially over the last 10 years. The Via de la Plata really has increased quite slowly and hasn't has only maybe doubled in that time frame. So it's still quite a fairly quiet Camino. I guess it's probably down to the fact that it's very long. It's a bit longer than most people would like to tackle. The stages are long at times, and also the walking season, because you can't really walk it in summer. The walking season is really March, April, sort of the first half of May, and then September, October. Outside those times, the weather can be quite hard. If you're unlucky with the weather, you can get cold and you can get a lot of rain. Whereas the Caminos in the north of Spain, the Camino Frances, for example, from say March, April onwards, you've got basically 6-7 months of good walking weather. So I guess the weather kind of puts people off as well. Anyway, I don't want to blabble on for too long. If that's okay, if it's okay, Johnny, will we throw it open to questions now? And
Of course.
Yeah.
Gerald, one of the points that I'd be interested in learning about from your more recent experience is one of the things that people are concerned about when they think about the Via de la Plata is that there will be very long stages between accommodation.
Yeah.
Is that true? And what would the longest be?
Well, the
And
longest.
Is it possible to cut down these distances?
Okay, the longest that you can't cut down is about 31 kilometers. So that's down here in Andalusia between Castiblanco de los Arroyos and Almedén de la Plata. And there is literally nothing on that stage. There's a place where, with a bit of luck, you'll get some water, but you shouldn't count on it. Now, that's the absolute longest. There's a few other fairly long stages, close to 30, but that's the longest one. There's the famous stage around Capará as well, but there are various ways of cutting that down. There's a few hotels and stuff which are not on the Camino, but quite near the Camino, and you can get to them fairly easily. So that would normally, if you walked it in one go, that would be a stage of about 36 kilometers, but you can easily cut it in half, so to make it more manageable. So 32 basically. And there's another stage where the Albergue is currently closed. That's about 32 as well.
Where is that, Gerald?
That's just after Cáceres. There's Casar de Cáceres, which is just after Cáceres, and the Albergue at the reservoir, which is Embalse de Alcántara, is closed. So you have to walk all the way to Cañaveral, and that's a 32-kilometer day.
But Gerald, you're advising people not to walk in the summertime.
Yeah.
I'm very foolhardy. I once walked from Madrid in August.
Yeah.
To walk to Sahagún, and I had to give up actually.
Oh yeah, okay.
It became intolerable.
How hot was it?
Well, I think it was 34 degrees.
That's not even that hot, yeah.
Well, it's hot for me. I'm from Scotland. Remember?
Well, yeah, I know, yeah.
And I live in Santiago. How much water would you say that people have to carry if they're walking the Via de la Plata in summertime?
Oh my God, that's a really difficult question. I don't like giving advice because, okay, let's assume it's going to be max temperature today, 40 degrees. Okay, that means you're starting off in the morning, say you'd need to get an early start. So you're setting off at 6 a.m. It's already going to be 20 degrees. By 10 o'clock, it'll be 30. And by 1 or 2, it'll be 36, 37. Now, I've occasionally walked short distances in that kind of heat, and it's very difficult. And I found it myself becoming disoriented in a way, in that I no longer, obviously my brain was overheated in some way. Another problem is your drinking water gets so hot that it's unpleasant to drink. So I don't know, you're asking me what advice do I give to somebody who wants to do something reckless and dangerous, and my advice really is don't do it.
So the advice is to walk in the winter or in the spring.
Yeah, that would be my advice.
But
yeah.
Gerald, there are also special considerations there. I mean, one of the things that surprised me, now I don't know why I hadn't thought of this.
Yeah.
I just set off 2nd of January 2007, off I went, and I walk at 4 kilometers an hour, and I try to time my days. But of course, I forgot that in winter time, the days are shorter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's
Yeah.
getting dark at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And there was I in the darkness, trying to find my way into Monasterio, for example, trying to find a hostel and so forth. So that's one of the things about winter walking that is a consideration.
Yeah, you'll have about 12 hours of daylight on it. Well, it depends on if it's cloudy as well. If it's cloudy, it'll get dark earlier. And as you get north, the days will get shorter and the weather will get worse. So I don't know what it would be like in Galicia in winter. I guess it gets dark pretty early.
Yes, it does. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So,
when it's getting dark.
and it won't be bright. It won't be properly bright till about 8 a.m. or something like that.
Now, members of the group, anybody have a question you want to ask Gerald? There we are. Kay, off you go.
I hope I haven't put you off now.
Kay,
Yeah. So I'm Australian, but I live in Zurich.
Hi.
I've just moved to Switzerland.
That's why you're not.
So you do have Australian representation, just
Okay.
from Sydney. Gerald, I was just going to ask you, what about doing the Camino in September, like the last 2 weeks in September, sort of that time frame? What kind of weather to expect?
Okay. Down in the south, it can be quite hot in September, but by the last 2 weeks of September, it's really, you could get anything. You could get quite moderate temperatures, say mid to high 30s, or you could also get like mid 30s. But it's not likely to be hotter than that.
Okay.
But September in the south of Spain can be quite hot.
Yeah, well, Aussies are used to the heat, right? Because we hike in the heat. So
yeah, but it doesn't mean you're used to walking in the heat. It's
30's pretty normal for us.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So the issue you'll encounter walking in autumn is that you'll start off in Seville and it can be 35 degrees. By the time you get up to Santiago, it's gonna be November basically, and it can be like freezing and raining.
Yes.
So you'll need to go prepared for every kind of weather.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Gerald, before we started, I was asking you about pilgrims are always worried about what happens if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Are there taxi services? Is there a baggage forwarding service if someone hurts themselves or
baggage and stuff? Correos do a full service from Urense to Santiago, which is basically the last 100 kilometers. There's a group of taxi drivers who provide a service from Granja, which is the point where the Camino San Andrés branches from the Via de la Plata. So that's about the last 400 kilometers. But besides that, there isn't a baggage service. There isn't an organized baggage service. Some people organize it with local taxi drivers who do it for you. This is expensive unless you're a group. So as for taxi services, well, yeah, every village bar has the phone number of a taxi driver they can call. Yeah, tends to be their cousin or whatever, but you know, they can call somebody.
We are in Spain.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question, Kelly.
So I'm thinking of going in January.
Yeah.
You know, second week in January.
Okay.
If you kind of made me nervous about the, you know, the one albergue at this one place is closed, and now you're walking, you know, 36 kilometers. So
no, sorry. The longest you'd have to walk where there's no alternatives is 32.
Okay.
Yeah, there is another one which is 36, but there are places where you can go off the Camino a short distance.
Okay.
And find places to stay.
At that time of year, though, should I not so much calling ahead to reserve a bed, but should I just call ahead to find out if they're even open?
It's really up to you. I mean, some of these villages just have one albergue, so you know, if they tell you they're not open, like, what are you going to do? Like, I mean, you just know in advance that they're not open rather than when.
Yeah, but it doesn't really help me because I got to walk there anyway, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
the thing is, like the Via de la Plata is a bit different to the Camino Frances. I don't know if you've ever walked the Camino Frances.
Yeah, I have a
but
couple times.
the Camino Frances tends to shut down in winter because there's very few pilgrims and because the summer is the peak walking time. The Via doesn't really to the same extent for several reasons. One is because it tends to be very quiet in summer, and so they stay open all year. And also the albergues are basically either municipal or they belong to say the people who own the local bar, in which case they don't shut down in winter. I'll just give a quick example. If you've got an albergue on the Camino Frances, the likelihood is it's quite big. You've got like 50 rooms and you've got a staff of 6 or 7. So there's no point staying open in winter. Whereas if you've got an albergue with 10 rooms and you run the local bar, then there's no point shutting down in winter because keeping it open doesn't cost you anything.
Yes.
That's assuming you don't provide heating, which is entirely possible. But so I wouldn't really worry about accommodation in winter because it won't be much different than any other time. Albergues shut down sometimes. The only time that a lot of them kind of shut is over Christmas. But
So right after Epiphany shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be back. Everything returns to normal after the 10th of January or so. Yeah. So I mean, whether you want to call ahead is entirely up to you. But I'd be careful of like Sundays and stuff or Mondays when the local bar might be closed and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, if you were totally stuck someplace, you could always just ask somebody for the number of a taxi, and you can always find some way of sorting it out, or ask somebody for the number of the people who own the albergue, and they can open it for you. I mean, the Via de la Plata is very informal in some ways, in that because a lot of these places are family run, the chances are, even if it's closed, they live nearby anyway and they can open it for you. I've never, I know I don't know if it's the right thing to say, but personally, in all the communities I've walked, I've never failed to find a place to stay. So I always I always tell people it's natural to kind of have this fear, but really in reality, it doesn't happen, does it? You always sort something out.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I mean, you're going there anyway. The only difference is that you're going to go there worried for 15 kilometers or 30 kilometers rather than just, you're going to have to sort it out anyway. So, yeah.
Well, exactly. It won't make any difference one way or another.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. My advice is don't worry, because it will be okay. Like, I don't know if that helps people, but maybe it's one of the things that Camino teaches us is not to be so worried about stuff, because things tend to work out. I mean, the Camino is a lot simpler than real life, really.
Yeah.
Might be harder from the point of view of having to walk long distances, but everything else is simpler, really.
Yeah, that's true.
Ana Rojas, you have a question.
Hi, everybody. I'm phoning in from Western US in Oregon. Thanks for doing this. I have two questions. One relates to what you were just talking about, and that is if there is, do people, given that we always find a place, right? We do, like but I had last year I walked the Salvador, and it was recommended highly that I call ahead. Or even just WhatsApp, even before I left the US, a couple of the places, just because the managers or the owners of the albergue sometimes just wouldn't have been around otherwise. Is that recommended? The Frances, I actually never called ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't know anybody. There's one or two albergues which do like you to call ahead, but then if you don't, it doesn't really matter.
It does. Okay.
So, no. Generally, I know I walked to Salvador a few years ago as well, and there is a few places there where they want you to book in advance, and in the previous albergue they'll tell you. I think it's also because I know there's a few places on the Salvador which are really small, and where but they feed you in a local guest house and stuff. I got the impression it was more about preparing meals and stuff, that they wanted to have an idea of numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
so-
they did. Yes, there, there's one restaurant in particular that just said if you didn't call the day before, we won't feed
yeah,
you.
yeah. That was the place with the little.
And it was, it was pretty remote, right? So
Yeah, exactly. There was no place else to
only-
eat, basically.
right, there's only so many almonds I can pack, right?
No, generally, no, that isn't the case on the Via.
Yeah. It's a
mean-
beautiful country. I recommend it if no one's walked it.
The Salvador, it is fantastic, isn't
Oh
it? Yeah,
my
you
gosh.
need good
They-
weather, but yeah, and it's
Yeah.
tough as well. It's a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
climbing.
yeah.
Do you have a second question, Anna?
I did have a second question. It's kind of I don't know. It's a little bit random. Anyone here walked the Via de la Plata in reverse? Does anybody?
There's
do
a
that? I'm
small
thinking
number of
about the weather. I don't know. Just
Yeah, actually, if you were walking in autumn, from the weather point of view, it would make sense. Yeah,
Mm.
because you start in Santiago, say in September, and then you arrive down in Seville in November or so. So yeah, there's a small number of people who do it in reverse. Yeah, but not
Okay.
many. Yeah,
not many.
I've
Just-
met 3 or 4 all the times I've walked it.
Everybody knows Ivor, who runs the Camino Forum. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
He and I used to do a bit of walking when I was trying to encourage him to walk a Camino. And,
you're letting the secret out now.
and we walked one day, we decided to walk one day from Santiago back the way to Padron.
All
And
right.
I discovered that I'm so dependent on these yellow arrows.
sure.
Me and Ivor got hopelessly lost. And it was one of these
Yeah.
days where we had to stop somebody and say, where are we?
Yeah,
And to see the strange look on this Spaniard's face. Anyway,
yeah.
Obi, you have a question for us?
Well, actually, could I say about walking backwards?
Of course.
Johnny makes a good point. It is easy to get lost, and but of course, if you got an app which shows you the track, that helps. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. You'd have to check your app a lot, and yeah, I don't know. There's a logic to walking in one direction, isn't there? I walked part of the Camino Frances backwards once, only like for a few hours, and I found it a kind of strange experience because everybody's coming towards you, and I don't know, it was a bit disconcerting. But anyway, if that's what you want to do, go for it.
When I stopped working and decided to live in Santiago because I wanted to do more walking, my colleagues, 3 of them randomly, gave me compasses. I've got 3 compasses in my drawer here, and of course, I've never used a compass once.
Yeah, sure.
Find the first arrow, walk to the next arrow, walk to the next arrow. Thank you. Obidu, you're on now.
Okay, so I'm Ovidiu, I'm from Romania,
Hi,
and I will be
Che faci?
hospitalero in Castil Blanco de los Arroyos in the
cool.
first half of October.
Oh,
What
What should I expect?
What should you expect in the first half of October?
Weather and number of pilgrims.
Ooh, in October, I'd say you'll get a fair number of pilgrims. Yeah, not a lot, but it is like late September is a relatively popular time to start from Seville. And for the weather, well, it could be very pleasant. In fact, October tends to be one of those months when it's not too hot, but the weather is still nice and warm. So it could easily be like 25 degrees or so.
And it's a lovely little town. Really,
It's a lovely town, yeah.
it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
You'll love it.
How long will you be there?
For 2 weeks,
2 weeks.
15
cool.
days.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
As I mentioned, the albergue from Castil Blanco de los Arroyos is closed between 1st of November until end of February.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are other options in the city or in
Yeah.
the village.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, there's a really nice little guest house, Casa Salvadora, which is where I've stayed loads of times. But why don't they open in February? I mean, there's quite a lot of pilgrims in February. I always find that a bit strange.
Well, I think things might change this year, Gerald.
Yeah.
The pilgrim, 1,900 pilgrims arrived at the pilgrim's office in Santiago yesterday.
Yeah.
This is it's extraordinary what's happening.
Yeah.
Already this year, the numbers are 40% more than they were in the Holy Year, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
Looking at the Holy Years from 1993, the numbers go up, but then they come back down again.
Yeah.
After this Holy Year, they just keep going
It's
up.
just staying there.
And pilgrims do need beds.
Yeah.
I have another question for you.
Yep.
We want people to approach the Via della Plata cautiously and with their eyes open.
Yeah.
There are one or two stages, as I remember, where there are quite stiff elevations. Later on,
yeah.
crossing the mountains into Galicia.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quite a strong walker, but it took I wasn't in good shape by the time I got to the top of the hill.
Yeah. There's some serious ones. Yeah. I reckon, I mean, people talk about some of the earlier stages, which are quite long, but actually there's some stages later on which aren't so long, but which have quite big climbs and descents, which I actually find kind of more tiring. After Agodinia, I know there's a place you can stop called Campo Beceros, but I continued walking once to the next village, which makes it about 30 kilometers with quite a lot of up and down. And I was absolutely exhausted by the time I arrived. So yeah, altitude and stuff can really make a difference, you know. But it's up in the north really. And the advantage is that if you start in Seville, if you make it that far, you're already pretty fit. So
Yeah.
Most people, if they drop out, it tends to be in the first 2 weeks for either injury, blisters, or just sometimes it's like, this just isn't what I want, and I'm going to go and walk an easier Camino. So, but you know, that's the way it is. Oh, you were saying there about numbers on the Camino Frances. Just to point out that me and Johnny were talking just before we came on, that's mostly the last 100 kilometers.
Yes.
So it's not the rest of the Camino Frances, which from what I see online, the rest of the Camino Frances is having an average year so far. There was a rush around Easter, but now it's calmed down a bit.
And I was speaking to Rebecca yesterday in Moratinos just before Sahagún on the Camino Frances, and she says it's perfectly normal. They're not being overrun.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine. I go on the Camino Frances most summers, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, and there's never problems with accommodation before Saturday. Anyway.
Kay, you have a question.
Yeah, I had another one. And Gerald, I apologize. I'm just starting to read your guide, so I'm sure you've covered this. But just when I look at the sections, how good are the bus services? Like if you get into trouble or if you want a break, I mean, how good are the bus services between the towns? Just can you sort of rather than rely on taxis?
Yeah, it's not always great. In fact, I would say as a rule, you wouldn't want to be depending on bus services. A lot of this Camino is through pretty remote areas where the towns are, well, they're villages really more than towns, but they can be quite a long way apart. And often, if there's a bus service, it may be like 2 buses a day or something. And it doesn't always go in the direction you want either. So the answer is really, if you find a bus, you're lucky. That public transport and stuff in these places, it often doesn't go at convenient times.
Okay, and what about in the bigger towns like Merida and Salamanca and stuff? Bus services from there in and out you can get, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah, right. Okay.
From Merida, you get bus services to Seville, Cáceres, Madrid, where the big cities around, and then there will be buses. Like there's a bus that goes from Merida down to Seville. It's a bus which stops in all the villages. So it stops in the few villages which are on the main road. So that would be like Torre Mejia and what's the name of that place? Villafranca and a few of those other villages. But the ones which aren't on the main road, it just bypasses completely. So Almadén de la Plata, for example, there's 1 bus a day. So,
Okay.
bus service really depends where you are.
And Gerald, people planning forward their Camino,
Yeah.
where would you recommend spending a day or 2 days?
Yeah. Well, Merida is beautiful. It's got loads of Roman ruins, and it's doesn't, unlike many places with Roman ruins, it isn't overrun with tourists. And it's a nice, pleasant little city that you could easily spend a day wandering around. Cáceres is a beautiful city too. It has an old, the old town, which is surrounded by a wall. And then after that, there's Salamanca, which I personally think is the most beautiful city in Spain. It has the Plaza Mayor, which is just fantastic. Zamora is also a beautiful city. And then Orense is famous for its hot springs and Roman baths and stuff down by the river. So that's worth, it's worth a day as well. Although the city is quite a busy business city, the hot springs by the river, people rave about them. Would be fantastic.
I think they're wonderful.
Yeah. Well, you're quite close to it there, Johnny, so I guess you can pop down anytime you want.
Are there any other questions? If not,
no. Well, actually,
I have one.
Oh, okay. Go on then. Go on, Obito.
All right, yeah.
If you would have a proposal for the best time to do Via de la Plata, starting from Seville, which is?
Well, okay. There's no simple answer. From the point of view of weather, the best time to leave Seville is, in a normal year, the 15th of April. That's what I reckon, right in the middle of April, from the point of view of weather, because you generally have good weather, but it won't be too hot. The problem is lots of people have kind of understood this, and this may be my fault to some degree. And so this is now the busy time. And there have been some reports of people having problems finding accommodation over the last couple of weeks. But so if you ask me, with that in mind, the compromise date, I would say anytime from the last week of February to the middle of, well, no, February might be a bit early. You might get bad weather. You never know.
Well, Gerald, I've walked 3 times starting in January.
Yeah.
And maybe I've just been lucky.
Maybe you have just been lucky. Yeah.
Did have some rain, but nothing extraordinary.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can be lucky. Like me in February, I was extremely lucky. In January, it rained for weeks on end, and that could happen. Yeah, unfortunately. But I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer, and it really depends on your own preferences. But anytime March, April is a good time to start. But if you leave in March, you're going to find it's cold at night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tim Redmond has a question for us.
So you need a good sleeping bag.
Thank you very much, because it's also according to my heart, because I prefer to spend the Eastern holiday with my family.
Yeah.
And thereafter to go on Camino.
Yeah. So then that's going to be April, depending when Easter falls. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, then you get better weather, but more people.
Tim Redmond.
Thanks. I'm calling from Liverpool. Nice to see everybody. Gerald, nice to see you. This came in the post today. I haven't had a chance to read it. Thank you very much for your guide to the Baztan route. 5 or 6 years ago, I used that. And it was,
all right. Okay. Yeah. The Baztan.
Worth its very lightweight in gold, I must say. It's brilliant. I haven't had a chance just to check out the route. And I was saying to John, in fact, I just randomly decided about 2 days ago it might be the time to do this. Just looking at the top end on a map here, to go to Orense, does it normally go through Astorga, or do you turn left? What do you turn onto to get to Orense that way? Is that a different?
Yeah, well, just north of Zamora, about 50 kilometers north of Zamora, there's a little village called Granja de Morihuela, And this is the point where the Camino divides. And the Via de la Plata continues straight up to Astorga. And it actually continues up. Some people would tell you that the Camino Salvador is part of the Via de la Plata as well.
Okay.
It goes up to the north coast of Spain. And then if you go left at Granja, it brings you on the Camino Sanabres, which goes through Orense.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that's the way most people go, although some people choose to walk up to Astorga and join the Camino Frances.
Especially if they haven't been that way before, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just the other end, and this is distracting a little bit, but I don't even know how you say it, Mozarabe or Mozarabe.
Mozarabe, yeah.
Anything to say about that?
I walked it last year.
It would feed into the Via de la Plata, is that correct?
Yeah, it joins it at Merida. I walked it last year from Almeria. Now it's I don't know. I started off in February, and we had some. It rained a bit, but it was kind of gray the whole time. I find the landscape down around Almeria, which is the extreme southeast of Spain, it's very dry. It's almost like a desert. And in gray weather, it was very gray. I didn't like it that much. But when you get further on, you go up, it gets greener. And when you get up towards, there's some amazing towns up there in kind of eastern Andalusia where they have lots of houses which are in caves and that kind of stuff. And then you get up to Cordoba. No, you come to Granada first, which is a beautiful town. And between Granada and Cordoba, it's almost all olive plantations, just for 7 or 8 days, just olive plantations. And after that, after Cordoba, you go up, it gets a bit mountainous, and then you come up into Extremadura. And from there on, it kind of looks like the Via de la Plata in Extremadura, mostly fairly flat landscape with the occasional hill and lots of towns built on top of hills, basically, because it's the Moorish type of town planning, basically. But it's a nice Camino, but after Granada, it doesn't have a great network of albergues.
Okay.
So you end up staying in hotels a lot, and also some long distances. There's a couple of like 35-kilometer days, which the only way to avoid it is a taxi.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
We've got 3 questions waiting. Gerald or Tim, could you briefly describe the Camino del Baztán? You
All right.
Guidebook.
Tim, would you like to describe it?
You go ahead, Gerald. I think well, I'll just say I enjoyed it. Say what you say, and I might say a word at the end.
All right, cool. Well, first of all, the Baztán is way up in the north of Spain. It actually starts in France at Bayonne. In case you don't know where Bayonne is, if you're going to start the Camino Frances, generally you arrive into Bayonne and you get the train from there up to Saint-Jean-Pied-Port. Now, you can walk straight from Bayonne due south, and the Baztán takes about 5 days and joins the Camino Frances in Pamplona, or just before Pamplona. Now, it's a beautiful Camino through some remote parts of the Basque Country. It's called the Baztán because it goes through the Baztán Valley, which is a very strongly culturally Basque area in the north of Navarra. The scenery is very green. In fact, I think it's the wettest part of Spain. And the villages are all these beautiful Basque villages with the big stone houses painted white with the massive big roofs. And up there, it's a really amazing architecture. It sometimes looks a bit like Switzerland. But if you're not familiar with the Basque Country, then certainly the Baztán is a great way to get an introduction to it. The stages, it's got a good network of albergues. There's no super long stages. There's a few climbs, but you're passing through the Pyrenees, so you have to expect that. And yeah, for instance, if you had a week's holidays and you wanted a Camino, then this would be a nice choice. But you won't meet many other people. It's going to be kind of quiet, I think. Yeah.
Gerald, there is a question. The albergue at the Embalse at Alcantara is in a key position.
Yeah.
Is there any information about it?
I haven't heard anything.
No, nor have I.
This albergue has a difficult history. I think basically the problem there is it belongs to the local municipality, to a village near there, and they rent it out to people who are supposed to run it as a business. And it's got an albergue and a bar and a restaurant. But the problem is it's in the middle of nowhere, and the only business they get is passing pilgrims. They don't get like the local people, because there are no local people. They don't get a passing trade because it's not on a road or anything. And I think with the very short walking season on the Via de la Plata, the pilgrims just don't provide enough income to run it as a viable business. And so everybody who takes it on seems to drop it again after a couple of years. So it ends up opening and closing all the time. I don't know what the solution is there. I mean, they could actually on the Camino Mozarabe, they have a few places where the association of the Amigos del Camino in Almeria have a really great system where you arrive at the albergue and you call a number, and there's a little box which you open with a 4-digit code, and the key is inside. And you basically let yourself in, you sign in, and you leave the money in a box, and you make yourself at home. So they could run it in that kind of way, but I don't know. Maybe somebody hasn't suggested to them. It seems like a really simple and kind of efficient way of running an albergue if it isn't busy enough to justify having somebody there all the time.
There are albergues on the Camino Inglés now where you phone the hospitalero and she tells you the code.
Yeah.
You enter the code and she turns up later on when take the money and give you a stamp in your credentials.
Yeah, exactly.
Final question, Gerald. We know that in Seville and Salamanca and these big Merida, there are very beautiful cathedrals and churches.
Yeah.
Are there any special buildings, churches, sites outside the larger cities that you would recommend to people?
Well, in some ways, this is a way that the Via is different from the Camino Frances. I mean, on the Camino Frances, almost every village has an amazing church, which is disproportionately large to the population of the village. But the Via de la Plata wasn't such a big pilgrimage route, so there aren't so many of the big impressive churches. That said, there's a few places like, well, I was actually out there today. There's just outside Seville, there's an amazing ruined Roman city called Italica, which is well worth a visit. And in the same village, Santi Ponce, there's the Monasterio de San Isidro, I think it's called.
Isidro?
Yeah, so that's also, it's not very big, but it's worth a visit, and the Camino goes straight past it. And then further north, one place that's really amazing is Osera, which is on the last 100 kilometers. It's a massive monastery. I believe it's the second biggest monastery in Spain, and it's nearly empty now. There's only a handful of monks there, and there's a new albergue.
And they're very welcoming.
Yeah, yeah, and you can go in, and they have a gift shop where they sell chocolate that they make themselves, and you can go in and to go to their vespers, the evening prayer. And yeah, it's really nice. And they do a tour. You can have a tour of the monastery as well, which is this massive building, which I don't know, it must be very well built because it hasn't fallen down yet. But I can imagine it would cost a fortune to renovate the place. But it's just amazing to see. And I think it's worth seeing now, because, you know, in 10 years' time, it might be in ruins, or it might be turned into a resort hotel or something like that. But yeah, besides that, the main cities have, okay, Johnny mentioned all the big cities have a fair number of monasteries and different historic buildings, especially Salamanca. Between them, there's not so much. Well, there's the Roman city of Capra, which the arch in the center of the city is quite well preserved, but the rest of the city is mostly well, you know, Roman cities, the local people tended to take all the stones to use as building materials. So there isn't an awful lot left, but there's a few things worth seeing around there. Yeah. But there's, I mean, that area of northern Extremadura, the countryside is just so beautiful. And there's a few villages there like Baños de Montemayor, which is another town with hot springs where you can enjoy the natural waters, and there's a few other places around there which are just beautiful as well. Yeah, I mean it's kind of there aren't like stunning buildings in the small villages like you get on the Camino Frances, but a lot of the villages are in themselves very beautiful, and you can also see how it changes from south to north. In the south, it's more Andalusian culture and everything painted white and stuff. And as you go further north, the building materials change. In the north, in the mountains, you get more stone buildings, and then you come into an area of Meseta where it's more made from mud. And then once you get up to Galicia, of course, you're back to building with stone again. And yeah, so.
Gerald, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you for being with us. If you've got any questions following the session, I've circulated my email. Don't hesitate to email me. I will ask Gerald for the answers and send, if I don't know them, and send them back to you. I think this has been a great session, and buen camino to all of you who are thinking of walking the Via de la Plata. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.